may promote the well-being of our people and set forth peace among all our people. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of this country, especially those of us who shall now meet in the Senate. We pray that you will be pleased to direct and prosper all our councils to the advancement of thy glory and for the benefit of our citizens. Give peace to all, reverence our debates, our discussions, that they may be frank and fair. And we ask for the direction of your Holy Spirit on us today, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. Not but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and his peace remain with us now and forever. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Announcements by Your Honor.
Minutes of our meeting held on 15th October 2025 for deferral.
Mr. President, I beg to move the deferral of the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 15th of October, 2025.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, 15th October 2025 be deferred. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The thanks the ayes have it. Those minutes are accordingly deferred. I have an excuse of absence for our chaplain, Reverend Wayne Curtin, who is unable to be with us today, and I want to thank Senator Reverend Charles Morris for leading us in prayer. And an indication of lateness from Senator Trent.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business of sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister, introduction of bills, public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 12, sir. Order number 12, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Caribbean Community Free Movement of Nations Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise this morning as a regionalist. I start there, Mr. President. I rise this morning, Mr. President, as the mature embodiment of an 18-year-old student who left Barbados in 1992 to go to the University of the West Indies, one of the institutions of functional cooperation established by the Caribbean community. I stand this morning as a graduate, not once but twice, of that institution of functional cooperation of the Caribbean community. I stand this morning as an older embodiment of that then 18-year-old young woman, not 1992, 1994, as that embodiment of that young woman, 1992 was the BCC, of that young woman who lived on a place called Irving Hall. I was an Irvingite. And Irving Hall, we used to call it, and it is still called in some instances, the cultural melting pot of the Caribbean region. At that time, in 1994, Chancellor Hall, typically one of the oldest halls on the Mona campus, all-male hall, typically had predominantly Jamaicans who lived on that hall. The Mary Seacole Hall, predominantly females, not predominantly, only females, predominantly Jamaican females. But Irving Hall and Taylor Hall were typically the two halls where Caribbean nationals lived. Irving Hall was where I lived. I lived among Barbadians like myself. Some of them are today my oldest friends, my dearest friends. We still have a group chat, actually, at our almost 50-year-old selves called Irvingites. And one of us changed the title of that group chat to put an H in front of the I in tribute to some of our friends who, in their Jamaican lingo, would say Irvingites. Mr. President, I did not realize until I was that 18-year-old student who left Barbados to live on Irving Hall that I had an accent. I didn't realize that there was a Barbadianness about the way in which I spoke. It just was. I didn't realize, Mr. President, that Caribbean people from St. Lucia, from Jamaica, from Antigua, all living together had these commonalities. The way we talk, slightly different, but you hear a beat, Mr. President, and the way we move is in unison. And we move in one movement, almost in singular fashion, as part of an identity that was shared, that many of us as 18-year-old students in first year of university never realized. Coming out of that experience, Mr. President, I have permanently been joined at the hip to our regional movement. I have been permanently joined by the heart to our Caribbeanness. I have been permanently joined in my mind and intellectually to the notion of the evolution of Caribbean civilization. That's who we are, Mr. President, a Caribbean people that is more similar than we are different in a lot of ways that many of us take for granted in our day-to-day lives until we are outside of our known environment. Mr. President, how many times have you traveled outside of the Caribbean region and you heard an accent and you turned and you looked to the side, and sometimes it may be in some far-flung quarter of the world, and you hear an accent and immediately, that's a Bajan, or that's a Jamaican. If you're outside of the Caribbean, you hear a Bajan, you are as excited as you are to hear a Barbadian accent as you are to hear a Caribbean accent, because that's who you are. And so, Mr. President, I remember in that 18-year-old self, being a student of international relations and diplomacy, one of my foundation courses at that time was a course called Introduction to International Relations. I met a young woman then who has remained my friend until now. She is currently serving in her country's diplomatic service as a high commissioner. And I remember her words shocking my Barbadian innocent sensitivities at 18 years old. She said, the region must integrate The region must move forward. And the only way in which we are going to do that is if we put all these old heads that have stood in our way and put them in a barrel and send them to the bottom of the sea. I was clutching my invisible pearls at the time because I said, what is she saying? What is she talking about? She was as fierce then as she is now, but the point stayed with me that we must never camp out at what historically has been an obstacle to regional integration, but we must always hold on to what was intended for our people and move forward. And so today, Mr. President, I rise as a point of pride to introduce and to speak on a bill to provide for the nationals of the Caribbean community in certain member states to enter Barbados, to stay indefinitely, and to work without a work permit. I rise with a great deal of pride to introduce this bill. And today my presentation is going to cover a few things, having already established that I am a regionalist, having already established that I sit in a government that has been regionalist from the beginning of time. Having also established, Mr. President, that beyond that, I come from a country that has been a champion of regionalism from the beginning of time. And where does that time begin, Mr. President? And that's where I want to begin. Several years ago, at the University of the West Indies, I remember purchasing a copy of a book that I spent some time in over the last couple of days as I prepared for this. A book that captured a seminal West Indian Caribbean report called Time for Action. And I spent some time in that book, Mr. President, in preparation for that debate, because today my theme still remains, and I see it there in one of my colleagues, the time for action still remains now. In 1973, Mr. President, the founding father of this nation, our Barbadian nation, joined with a couple of other Caribbean prime ministers to create and to establish and to sign the Treaty of Chaguaramas in its original form. Errol Barrow, Prime Minister of Barbados, joined with Guyana's Forbes Burnham, Jamaica's Michael Manley, and Trinidad's Eric Williams to sign the original Treaty of Chaguaramas. Mr. President, at the time, these four founding fathers said a couple of things, and a subsequent Prime Minister described them as this: men of discernment and determination, the courageous pioneers of the future, not craven prisoners of the past. That's what they described them as. As I read that, I remembered my friend in first year university who talked about not being slaves to the past, but always moving forward. Then, Mr. President, in 1967, before we even got to the question of 1973, where the Treaty of Chaguaramas was established, Forbes Burnham said this. He said, either we weld ourselves into a regional grouping serving primarily Caribbean needs, or lacking a common positive policy, have our various territories and nations drawn hither and thither into and by other larger groupings where the peculiar problems of the Caribbean are lost. This, he said, is the naked truth. And there's a book that is titled by the following words, but it went on. I don't think I ever realized that the words went on. It says, either we integrate or perish. I know many of us know the book Integrate or Perish. But the actual quote from him said, this is the naked truth. Either we integrate or perish, unwept, unhonored. Unwept, unhonored. Who will cry for a lost Caribbean civilization if not us? And so then on the occasion of the signing of that original treaty, Eric Williams said this: there can be no new dispensation which does not mean the integration of fragmented economies of the people of the Caribbean by the people of the Caribbean and for the people of the Caribbean. Mr. President, this is who we are. This is the stock we are made of. This is where we come from. These are the men and the women in later years on whose shoulders we now stand. So, Mr. President, by the time we found ourselves at 1992, the seminal 1992 West Indians Commission report, Time for Action, there were a number of things that came out of that, including the vision for the Caribbean single market and economy. We now see the Caribbean single market and economy, and as Barbadians, and certainly as Barbadians with the Prime Minister who from Owen Alpha and before have been the people who have been the chair in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet with responsibility for the CSME, we take it almost for granted. The time for action set out the market that was to be the single market and economy. And that 1992 report was instrumental in advocating for the creation of the CSME. Coming out of that, Mr. President, we then moved a little further. We had the macro framing, and then we moved into what the minutiae of it would have been. We then went into what hassle-free travel was supposed to look like. We conceptualized the ease of travel and the freedom of movement. And then, Mr. President, something happened in 2013. I'm coming all the way forward to go back. A landmark case wrapped the attention of the Caribbean region. Shanique Myrie, known to all Barbadians, certainly of a certain generation, the Shanique Myrie case of 2013 attracted attention not just for the legal precedent that it generated, but for how spectacularly badly it was handled by Barbados at the time. So, Mr. President, but that notwithstanding, it created a legal precedent that has since then shaped the Caribbean's view of freedom of movement. How we see freedom of movement. So, Mr. President, I'm going to pause there because I want to go back. The case had a couple of implications. It addressed what was meant to be the nature and scope of the right of movement within CARICOM in the first instance. It established the supremacy of community law and the protector and custodian of community law in an institution that evolved since then in the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ. It explored and exploded the dichotomy between freedom of movement and the movement for economic activity. It exploded it. It set a new precedent, and it then led to the attorneys general of the region meeting to qualify what these things actually meant. And in those meetings, and coming out of those meetings, it said that the 2013 decision emphasized that exemptions to the right of entry should be narrowly interpreted. It said that the Secretariat of the CARICOM Secretariat then was instructed to intensify training and sensitization of our immigration officials at the border to make sure that they understood that while that particular case initially exposed Barbados' shortcomings, it ultimately, and it quotes and it says this, ultimately catalyzed regional reform and clarified the legal foundation for free movement. It exploded the idea that entry into a country at the time coming out of that case was only for the purpose of economic activity. Then, Mr. President, I want to come to the various leaders of the Caribbean region. And I don't know of any luminaries in Caribbean Court of Justice law here, but I will defer where needed to the constitutional lawyer that I'm sure has studied this in great detail when the time comes. Mr. President, this country, Barbados, has had leaders over a long period of time in the post-independence era. I took some time, Mr. President, to go through the different things that they have said, the different issues that they have raised, and I can summarize them into some categories, Mr. President. In the first instance, in the 1970s, we had Errol Walton Barrow. Errol Walton Barrow focused on the foundational elements of the CSME and the CARICOM region. He focused on the visioning of where we should go and what it should be. He talks about what should be the political and normative basis for integration, and he talks about people-centered cooperation. Barrow's rhetoric at the time, during the 1970s, supplied the foundation for what later underpinned the CSME's people-centered interventions, and it gave the political legitimacy for the CSME treaty instruments that evolved later. Fast forward then, Mr. President, to the 1990s. Owen Seymour Arthur, former Prime Minister of Barbados, 3 terms, who became arguably the leading regional voice on Caribbean integration in the 1990s, and to this day, there are still elements of the integration movement, our regional integration project, that were spearheaded by Owen Seymour Arthur. The CSME itself is one of those shining examples. The policy implementation, the policy interventions of the 1990s were arguably led by this former Prime Minister of Barbados, who emphasized at the time the economic benefits of mobility and the importance of sequencing. He specifically in the 1990s designed what he saw as the CSME choices, how we can advocate for sequencing, and then introduce the notion into the Caribbean single market and economy of mutual recognition of qualifications, and I'm going to come to that in a bit. He looked at what would be the operational mechanisms required to institute movement, and then what would be the right of establishment. A right of establishment related in this instance to juridical persons, companies, corporate entities to set up an entity within a country. Whereas on the one hand, you have freedom of movement of persons, freedom of rights of establishment, freedom of movement of capital, and these things then constituted the CSME. Out of that body of work, we then had the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, establishing in law the CARICOM single market and economy. But this became, Mr. President, in a contemporary sense, an interesting question. There are those who have said over the last few weeks, Mr. President, since this was introduced in Barbados, that there were, and I quote, missteps as to what could or should have been done. But, Mr. President, the original Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed in 2001. The revised Treaty of Chaguaramas was enshrined in the Caribbean Community Act of April 2003, Mr. President. It was proclaimed, Mr. President, in domestic legislation on January 24th, 2005. There is an article in today's newspaper, which I'm sure everybody who has a newspaper or has a newspaper subscription can see easily, but more importantly, Mr. President, if you actually understand the history of our region and in our parliament, you can go back and you can see on the parliament's website when at the time before we were a republic, when the bills were laid, when the administrative arrangements were put in place. You can see when at the time before a republic, when the Governor General at the time, Sir Clifford Husbands, I think it was, who got the royal assent, and then it was proclaimed. All of that is freely available on the Parliament of Barbados' website. And so, Mr. President, the notion that Barbados in some way has done something extraordinary by initiating the free movement regime on the 1st of October and then domesticating it into domestic law after the fact is a misnomer, because it has precedent not just in Barbados, but all across the region. If you look at the way in which the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas since 2001 was domesticated in law in each CARICOM country, in each instance, it took between 2 to 5 years before it was instituted into domestic law across the Caribbean region. That is well documented, and on the back page of the newspaper, even more so, it is spoken about by a regional prime minister. But in the parliamentary records of our region, you will see that we have always, from the beginning with the original Treaty of Chaguaramas through the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and then, Mr. President, there were some subsidiary pieces of legislation, including the Skilled Nationals Act, which didn't come into effect until afterwards. So there is nothing extraordinary, or there's no mischief associated with domesticating into domestic law that which was agreed to by the heads. So I want to just dispel that. But getting back to Owen Arthur and the 1990s, what he saw it as an economic construct. He wanted to make sure that we were able to have some structure around the economic construct that would give transparency and predictability, not just to investors as it related to the rights of establishment and the free movement of capital, but to Caribbean people as it related to the free movement of people. He said at the time that free movement must be built on clear rules, recognized qualifications, and institutions that protect investors and citizens alike. Those were some of the things over 3 terms in office that Owen Arthur led. Coming out of his leadership, we saw a series of technical pilots for recognition, legislative and regulatory alignment, and increased interprofessional engagement. Then we came to the period of 2008 to 2010, when the late David Thompson was Prime Minister. David Thompson then spoke about the need for administrative harmonization. He wanted to make sure, as Prime Minister, that Barbados had the regulatory systems in place required by the CSME to process, and he had a very specific area of emphasis, cross-border service providers and professionals, and his work focused on highlighting the skills certificate and regulator capacity needs. That was where David Thompson would have camped out. Owen Arthur would have had 3 terms in office, and we know that David Thompson, the late David Thompson, was not in office for as long as that, and so the literature covering what he would have focused on during his time is obviously quite limited. But what was important was that between Owen Arthur and David Thompson, the question of mutual recognition of qualifications was an area of attention for Barbados. David Thompson's technical emphasis at the time helped to move the discussion piloted by his predecessors from rhetoric about rights and the administrative and the practical and the economic that he focused on into the social and the technical elements that policymakers needed to fund and implement. He said a couple of things, but this is the one I want to say. He said, we have to focus on our ability to move people's skills with legal clarity as a lawyer and administrative readiness. Fast forward a little bit further, 2010s, Frundell Stewart, former Prime Minister of Barbados. He advocated targeted mobility, but with safeguards, monitoring indicators, and contingency triggers within CSME implementation mechanisms. He was a lot more conservative than all of his predecessors. He didn't go as far as any of his predecessors did, because he tied explicitly at the time the need for safeguards and monitoring CSME rollout with contingent rights, which subsequently we saw contingent rights come into effect, the protocol on contingent rights come into effect in 2019. But there was the emphasis, Mr. President, as a common theme across all of Barbados's leaders since independence and since the start of the CARICOM movement for people to be free to move, except in some instances we saw that happening in one limited context, but philosophically, Barbados has always seen the evolution. The need for contingent rights has always been a conversation. Some have been more expansive than others, and then comes in 2018 onwards, our current Prime Minister, Mia Amour Motley. If you read the literature, Mr. President, Barbados features prominently in every single incarnation of regional integration. There are 2 leaders outside of our founding father, Errol Walton Barrow, who feature prominently in every single commentary on this regional integration movement. Aside from Errol Walton Barrow, Owen Seymour Arthur, and now Mia Amour Motley are seen as the most extensively quoted voices on regional integration. They have been credited in every publication I have found in the contemporary context with pushing the envelope for regional integration. In the case of Mia Amour Motley, her legacy to date has covered a few things. One, further pushing forward with the implementation of the CSME, looking at identifying how that implementation deficit that has plagued the CARICOM region can be addressed by naming agencies, harmonizing coding, making sure that we are publishing and monitoring on the CSME operationalization, insisting that the formalization of the CSME implementation not be hamstrung by unanimity, but to allow for willing states to proceed. And here we are in 2025 with 4 member states being those willing states coming out of the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in Jamaica, where it was agreed that 4 member states would go forward with this current free movement regime. But that too, Mr. President, is not new. In every incarnation since 1973, there has always been an instance where some move forward and others do not. Some catch up, some add on, and others do not. That is nothing new. I am not, Mr. President, in the business. I have spent too long in international relations to attempt to speak on behalf of other member states. It is not our job as the government of Barbados to speak on behalf of Guyana, to speak on behalf of Jamaica. They have, however, made publicly their position known. And so, Mr. President, that is available for all to see. But in the case of Barbados, on whose behalf we can speak, and we do speak, Barbados has seen itself featuring in every single incarnation where, as a whole or in part, we have moved forward with regional integration. So that brings us to where we are now, Mr. President. We have seen the introduction of the bill before this chamber. I want to collide with the actual bill itself in my presentation, having given the context for why the bill is here, having given the context for our commitment to regional integration, and then how we plan to treat to the legal construct. The bill is arranged in just 11 sections, Mr. President. It starts with a short title, which we can see. It interprets what the terms mean. It defines, Mr. President, in Clause 3, what indefinite stay means. It talks about some special provision specifically for seamen in Clause 4. It speaks about the right to work without a work permit, and I want to pause there again to speak about the differences between the freedom of movement regime, the movement of skilled nationals regime, and the relationship between mutual recognition. Mr. President, when I look at the screen, I see MSc there. My master's is in international trade and trade law. Under the terms of international trade, Mr. President, there are principles known as mutual recognition and equivalence. Even in free movement regimes, Mr. President, even in cases where there are supranational institutions, there must always be mutual recognition of qualifications and equivalence schemes. The Barbados Accreditation Council, Mr. President, as it relates to NVQs, CVQs, has not been closed to the best of my knowledge. It still exists. And so if, for the purpose of skilled movement and having recognition of qualifications, the work of the Barbados Accreditation Council, and they have done a tremendous job in publishing what those qualifications are at the level of NVQs and CVQs. But Mr. President, we have legislation that governs certain professions, and I have had the opportunity in particular as the former head of the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries and as a former trade negotiator with a specialization in international trade and services to be very clear on what mutual recognition means. It means, Mr. President, that if I require a job where there is no professional registration required, I still have to meet the minimum qualifications for that job. It means that my qualifications have to be deemed to be equivalent to those which are necessary for the job that I'm applying for. It means, Mr. President, that I have to be able to have mutual recognition, which means that I can't pick up from a random university that you go on and start, Mr. President, and then decide you're going to call it some special fancy name and get some special fancy qualification, but it has no mutual recognition, it has no accreditation, and therefore the qualifications cannot be certified. The qualifications from a certifying institution must still be recognized by your employer. But as it relates to certain categories of employees, of professionals, we are the competent agency, ministry, with regard to the movement of professionals, and so I had the opportunity to engage with the agency that I once led, the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries, Mr. President, to discuss the question that has been mooted in the media, and I want to attempt once more from the government side to qualify that. The movement of persons relates to the right to live and work. It does not remove the right or the responsibility of your professionals to meet the qualification requirements of a given job. That does not take it away, Mr. President. If you are a doctor, the Barbados Association of Medical Professionals is your body, but you have the Barbados Medical Council that has the responsibility for admitting you to practice. You can admit to practice as a general practitioner or as a specialist, but that is the sole remit to license you as a doctor on an annual basis, inclusive of your continuous professional development requirements as a doctor. This regime does not remove that. If you are an accountant and you are subject to the requirements of ICAP, this freedom of movement regime does not remove the ability of ICAP to function as the oversight body in law, Mr. President. ICAP is incorporated as a body corporate in the Institute of Chartered Accountants Barbados Incorporation Act of 1974, Cap 369A. It remains there, and it is a competent authority, Mr. President, for accounting professionals. If you are an attorney at law, the Bar Association remains the same. If you are a nurse and you have to be registered, the Nursing Association and the Nursing Council remains the same. If you are a pharmacist, the requirements remain the same. The freedom of movement regime does not remove those requirements. And I say that, Mr. President, with every confidence because I remember the context of negotiating the Economic Partnership Agreement where we had to be able to look at where the equivalence was in qualifications, in particular for these same sectors. In the Economic Partnership Agreement at the time, we knew that architects, engineers, and accountants and management consultants were the 4 areas that we identified for mutual recognition and equivalence negotiations. That still remains for professionals. It has not been removed. Now, I know that there has been some conversation since some time now on a single registration of CARICOM professionals process. That is not what this is, and it is not to be conflated with the free movement regime. They're 2 separate things. One has not yet been implemented. It is at the discussion phase, and it is still being articulated, but it is not what is before us. And I want to make sure that we are not conflating separate things into one, and in so doing, creating angst among our sectors and our people. The rules governing freedom of movement will not in any way compromise the need for us to have certain professions regulated as exist still in law. I want to make that clear, Mr. President. So as I come to the legislation, again, Mr. President, I should say come back to the legislation, having attempted to qualify what Clause 5 is not about, I want to move on then to Clause 6, the use of a domestic driving permit. I remember over many, many years, CARICOM had been having a discussion about moving from one jurisdiction to the other and driving your car and being able to get onto a ferry and take that ferry and land in another jurisdiction and then get off and use your driver's license. We're not there yet, but the driving license is still something that is covered in this legislation. How the schedule is to be amended, which is by order, which is also not abnormal. Regulations needing to be developed, not abnormal, and then the consequential amendments that are covered at Clause 9 and Clause 10 with the amendment of Cap 12 and the Act of 2021-2023, which was the original revised Treaty of Chaguaramas legislation, Mr. President. Where we are now is an interesting moment of time, and it is the reason why I say the Time for Action report has never lost its currency. We've spent a lot of time since the Time for Action report, Mr. President, looking at what the architecture needs to be. I've always called it the institutional scaffolding. Each one build one. I have taken us through where Errol Walton Barrow was, where Owen Arthur then took us, where David Thompson took us, where Frondell Stewart went, and where Amor Motley is now, Mr. President. Each one has built on what was left by the other in a continuum, Mr. President. that has said that Barbados is not afraid to lead, and on matters relating to regional integration, Barbados has continuously led. This instance, Mr. President, a seminal moment for our region, yet again, Barbados is leading with 3 others. That there are others that will come alongside, I am confident that that will happen. But if not, that is a matter for sovereign governments to determine. But this sovereign government has always been in the vanguard of regional integration. Mr. President, I want to take a few moments to speak about 2 matters. One, the regional floor for social protection. The regional floor for social protection, Mr. President, has been a conversation across the Caribbean region as we talk about economic movement. How do we limit dislocation to domestic populations as a result of freedom of movement? And this has been a real issue. The question of contingent rights stood in the way of CARICOM integration and free movement for a really, really long time, up until 2019, when that was finally agreed. Those are issues that people are genuinely concerned and understandably concerned about, Mr. President. But that systems have to be put in place to be able to do it, Mr. President, and to have them monitored, Mr. President, is not a reason for us to not do it, Mr. President. It is not a reason for us to not do it. A few months ago, Prime Minister Motley, speaking, I believe it was in Jamaica, she said a couple of things. And I'm going to start here, Mr. President, and work my way back. In her April 2025 address at the time as CARICOM chair, she was speaking during the global trade crisis as it was blowing up with tariffs here, tariffs there, tariffs everywhere. And she said this, in my capacity as chair of the Caribbean community, our world is in crisis. I will not sugarcoat it. These are among the most challenging times for our region since the majority of our members gained their independence. This was in April, Mr. President. We are now in almost November. And we live in a country, Mr. President, I'm going to choose my words very carefully here. We live in a country where the rule of law still prevails. We live in a country, Mr. President, where if you're doing the wrong thing or suspected of doing the wrong thing, you are investigated. If there's merit, you are arrested. If there's merit, you are charged. If there's merit, you are tried. And if there's merit, you are convicted or released. That's the rule of law as I know it internal to my country. It is also the rule of law as I know it in international law, public international law. But we live in a time, Mr. President, where that may not be what is happening per se. I am not sure when law changed and we stopped arresting and interdicting and charging and convicting. But, Mr. President, this is the world in which our Caribbean now lives. These are troubled times, Mr. President. And if not now, to define a Caribbean civilization and a regional integration movement designed by us for us, when will we do that, Mr. President? When will be the time, if not now? Prime Minister Motley also said to those who were not here, because she was using an example of those who have had similar regional experiences and what happened there. She said, those who wish to opt out or to cherry pick only which aspects of the regional architecture work best for them might well heed the lessons of Brexit and the $100 billion divorce bill Britain is now confronting because of the prospective loss of all the other benefits of functional cooperation that were seamlessly tied to its membership of the Union and taken for granted. If not now, then when? The time for action report is as urgent now as it was then. The institutional scaffolding that has been built by each successive leader of this country requires courage and boldness, and as was spoken about the original founding fathers of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, it requires us to be pioneers of our future and not holding on to a time that has passed. If ever there was a time, Mr. President, for regional solidarity, regional identity, regional unity, it is absolutely now. Mr. President. And so this bill before us, this bill talks about the movement of our people, the ability of people to come into Barbados and to live and to work. It sets up the administrative arrangements. When people land, Mr. President, they are given an indefinite stay. If they want to go back if they come in on vacation, as opposed to the 6 months, they're given an indefinite stay. If they want to live and they want to work, there are parameters set out in the administrative arrangements associated with this bill that tell them what to do under the Immigration Act. They are required to go to the Ministry of Labor, and in the Ministry of Labor, they're registered there. They sign up, they put the information there, and they get the following things: a registration number for their taxes, a national insurance number, and a national ID. It means that they are contributing members of our society, earning and paying their way so that they have the benefit then of the social services that are available to all of us, because they are financing it by way of their taxes. You pay to play, Mr. President. That's what's inbuilt into the process. But they get indefinite stay. In the reverse, if we go to Belize, if we go to Dominica, and if we go to St. Vincent, we have the ability to do the same thing. So, Mr. President, this legislation here, as I close, gives us a pathway for the way forward. Barbados, Belize, Dominica, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. 18th of September 2025, moving forward to implement amongst themselves in those small groups, pending the joining of others, to have free movement of Caribbean citizens. The 18-year-old girl who went to live on Irving Hall at the University of the West Indies campus, our flagship of functional cooperation, has had the absolute honor of her life, standing here, having spent the time over the last couple of days preparing for this debate. I've spent the time, Mr. President, making sure that as we talk about some of the issues, that we legitimize people's concerns. Are we opening the door for persons to come into the country illegitimately? No, we're not. Are we relaxing border controls? No, we're not. How do we protect Barbadians from the criminal element coming in, Mr. President? And that's where the beauty, again, of that institutional scaffolding comes in. The Prime Minister of Barbados, in a previous life, as Attorney General of Barbados, would have been instrumental in setting up an institution called Caribbean Impacts, so that when we think we're filling out forms, and we are filling out these forms when we are traveling, and we're like, what do you want all this information for? Little do we know that by the time we fill out that information, it is scrubbed through a system that says, are you this, are you that, are you on anybody's watch list? From Interpol to the US system, from across the Caribbean systems, your information is scrubbed to ensure that the borders of this country are safe. And that is what is expected to continue happening under the free movement of persons across the region. So border security is not satisfied, is not sacrificed. Impacts is still there. The JRCC is still there. The Interpol databases, they're still there. The Caribbean region, we're still sharing information. The US, still sharing information. And collaboratively, we have been able to keep our borders safe. US Homeland Security in particular. And so, Mr. President, I commend this bill to this honorable chamber. I commend this bill to this honorable chamber filled with Caribbean nationals, filled with Caribbean faces, Caribbean voices, Caribbean movements, Mr. President, filled with the identity of who we are as a people, Mr. President. This is a chamber of Barbadians, but Barbadians of Caribbean descent. All of us in our homes, in our families, have family members who live overseas. I, as that 18-year-old student, Mr. President, not only did I not know that I had an accent until I heard it through the voice of somebody else. And everybody in this room knows that they love one particular word to pronounce it all the time. They all want to pronounce one particular word, which I can't use in this forum. But they get very excited when they hear a Barbadian accent pronouncing it. Black Rock. I know. something like that, but Barbadian accents. We talk about how the other person talks. But what I also did not know, which is not so positive, Mr. President, was how other Caribbean countries viewed how we viewed them. I never knew that until I left home. I never knew, Mr. President, when I lived here, that people were so resentful of Barbadians calling them low islanders that come out here on a banana boat, who they're foreigners. I never realized how offensive it was to our Caribbean neighbors until I lived on the outside. I never realized, Mr. President, until I lived on the outside of us, how they viewed what they saw as an insulting Barbadian vernacular as it relates to our Caribbean neighbors. They didn't like it. And we dismissed it for many, many years as them just jealous, Suey. Them just jealous because we got this, and them just jealous because we justified, in some instances, the way in which we spoke to, treated with, and saw our neighbors who looked like ourselves. The same people, Mr. President, now when we are on a train in a far-flung capital of the world, we turn when we hear the sound of their voices and the lilt of their accents, Mr. President, those same people. And so I don't want us, in a modern incarnation, to use legislation or occasions like this to perpetuate that which has caused our neighbors so much angst. What has been perpetuated on them by so many generations before us. And each time I've seen it and I've heard it, I was confused, Mr. President, because I remember as a young girl leaving Barbados and traveling to the United States on occasion, on summers, to visit with my family, and being very offended when people ask me if we have houses down there, if we live in huts down there. I remember, Mr. President, leaving Barbados and moving to Africa and living in an African country and being very offended by people saying, well, how you manage out there with all them poor people? Who knew, Madam Deputy President, that in some instances you live far better? The level of insularity, Mr. President, that sometimes governs our conversations is oftentimes driven by the fact that we've always looked at ourselves from on the inside, never from on the outside, and how we see others and how it offends others, Mr. President. Our Barbadian people are Caribbean people. Our Caribbean people are our own. We are a Caribbean civilization, and in the just concluded CariFesta celebrations, the big conversation on which, on that stage in Golden Square, right across the way, the Prime Ministers of Barbados and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, the Secretary General of CARICOM, and the Ambassador Sommer of Belize, who all spoke about who we are as a Caribbean civilization, Mr. President. We are still those people. And the questions of xenophobia and insularity, Mr. President, I believe that in 2025, we must have outgrown, because as we look outside our own region, Mr. President, there is no one in my life at almost 50 years old that I know who does not have a relative who lives in somebody else's country, who does not have children who have migrated and live in somebody else's country and live and work. There is no one that I know. And so the notion that we are comfortable living and working in our families with other people's country, in other people's countries, but we are so closed about who comes and does the same in ours, Mr. President, is a contradiction of terms. And it is something that has caused our Caribbean neighbors angst and hurt. The time has come for us to take action. The time has come for us to take action, Mr. President, on advancing our regional project. The time has come, Mr. President, for us to take action on putting the practical measures in place to implement our regional ambitions. The time for action has come, Mr. President, for us to put to bed our old insularities and our old xenophobic notions about who we are as Caribbean people. The time has come, Mr. President, for free movement of Caribbean people to live and to work all across this region. The time has come, Mr. President, and the time is now. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to make a contribution to this bill regarding the free movement of persons from certain Caribbean countries in Barbados. And, Mr. President, as most persons within my generation, we grew up on a diet of CSME. I believe that all of us in here at some point in time had to write essays. We had to on the benefits of the CSME and reach the regional integration process as we went through school for CXCs, for A-levels, well, not as, and I'm certain that it's being done at Cape, and then when we got into University of the West Indies for our foundation courses, that played a part of the process as well. This country has a reputation of always being one of the forerunners in terms of regional integration. This is seen, Mr. President, when we look at the Caribbean Court of Justice. It is Barbados who was one of the first countries to sign on to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it is a sad reality today that those initial countries who signed on have not been joined by other countries within the Caribbean signing on and making the Caribbean Court of Justice their final court of appeal. But Barbados went first, we did it, and we signed on to the Caribbean Court of Justice, showing our commitment to regional integration and to the Caribbean single market and economy. I believe that before Prime Minister Arthur, Prime Minister Sandiford held the responsibility for the Caribbean single market and economy, and that tradition has always passed on to all of the subsequent Prime Ministers of Barbados to get that single economy working and together. And it has always been the view of Barbados that we believe in regional integration. We also, and going very far back, we always stood for regional integration. We all benefited from the University of the West Indies and having the opportunity to sit in classrooms with persons from other Caribbean territories. Some of us had the opportunity to go to other Caribbean states to study or even to work, or maybe just simply to vacation or follow West Indies cricket match to another Caribbean territory. So the regional integration movement is, Mr. President, is not uncommon to us, and it is something that we all support and we would like to see it happening. We do have our reservations though, after so many years of trying and not being able to fully get that integration happening. And I think that that is something that we need to pay close attention to, because persons in the generations above mine, parents and grandparents, would know of the failure of the Federation. And the slow pace in which the Caribbean is moving towards all coming together and signing on to the treaties that bring about the regional integration, I believe it is becoming a problem and a difficulty to convince the younger generations of the importance of this regional integration movement. And that is something that we need to pay close attention to as we discuss regional integration, because for the seniors, we are established and we have gone through our time, but it is the ones who are coming who have to work with whatever integration is developed that we agree upon, and it is those young persons who will be impacted by the decisions which we are making here today. Many of us believe that a fully integrated Caribbean would be better for our economic and social development. Many of us believe that being able to explore the cultures and share within the cultures of the other Caribbean countries would help in our regional and economic development. And if we pull together, because through the unification of CARICOM, our leaders have been able to make a mark on the world stage, voting together as a bloc on significant policies at the United Nations. But now, sometimes we see there's a difference in that, because even with the current situation which is going on, up to last week, I believe that there was a meeting of regional leaders, and in terms of maintaining the Caribbean as a zone of peace. And majority of the leaders took one view, but then you had other leaders with their own national agendas which decided to take another view. But the general consensus is that when the Caribbean community work together, we believe that we see more success and opportunities for the economic growth and development of the region. We should be doing, and we also, as Barrow said, we need to get the mindset of persons to recognize that regional integration is not just about trade alone, but it is also about the culture and the livelihoods of all of the persons within the region. So that is why, Mr. President, in order to get that happening, the University of the West Indies was a good project. The Caribbean Examination Council, also another significant project, even though to this day it is going through its turmoil with some jurisdictions not necessarily satisfied with the way in which it is being administered. But it is something which we need to work on and which we need to maintain and hope that it does not die but continues to make a contribution towards the education of our people and to provide a syllabus, training which will be relevant to our people. So all of these things are necessary. But we cannot just have it. And before going on to that, Mr. President, I would also add that the regional integration and the movement of labor didn't just happen, because we are accustomed to, in Barbados, where you had persons coming from St. Lucia and St. Vincent, especially on the boats. When you had the boats coming into the island, they will bring their produce, they will set up in the markets in town, they will sell their produce, they will interact with Barbadians. Some of them stayed in Barbados, and to this day, many of them are still residing here in Barbados. And up to a few years ago, the issue was in terms of getting citizenship for some of those persons who have been in Barbados for a number of years, but because of the process of going through citizenship in Barbados, the immigration process had not yet received the documentation as actual citizens of Barbados for the long period of time in which they were here. And I believe that that process was started on the Democratic Labour Party, where we had a number of citizenship induction ceremonies at the Lloyd Erskine Sandifer Center, where we regularized the status of those persons who had been living and contributing to Barbados for a number of years. Many of them came here as vendors and eventually enshrined themselves into the Barbadian society to the extent that their descendants, you will not necessarily know that their parents are not necessarily born Barbadians, but their descendants now are more Barbadian than any other person. and they still maintain that connection with their families in places such as St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, Guyana, wherever they came from. And for us Barbadians as well, there was a time in the 60s where many Barbadians left these shores and went to places such as Guyana and other Caribbean territories as well, and worked within the civil service and established families in those areas. Those are some of the things which help to maintain and start the regional integration movement. And as a result of that, many of us can possibly look into our family tree and point to relatives who are probably living in Guyana, St. Vincent, may have all over the Caribbean. Those are the things that started our regional integration movement. But how serious are we as a country and as a government in terms of continuing and making sure that that regional integration movement is solidified and becomes something not just that we talk about, but something that we actually live and that we actually maintain? And Mr. President, we can't just simply talk about it, because it is a process and there are certain steps that must be adhered to in order for that process to work. And as I hinted to before, with the failure of the Federation and the long journey in which we have taken to bring the Caribbean single market and economy into full being, we have to be very careful that we are not sowing seeds of doubt and failure into the minds of upcoming generation, because we're, as they will say, and these younger generation are people of action, you're just hearing a lot of talk, but you're not necessarily seeing the commitment and the effort being put in to making it a reality. And there are certain things, Mr. President, which must be done in order to make it a reality. There are certain things, Mr. President, which must be done in order to make it a reality. We're talking about regional integration. If we want to be integrated regionally, I believe that we need to be able to get across the Caribbean easily and at a cheaper rate at which we are doing it today. And Mr. President, in order for that to happen, you must have the modes of transportation necessary. That is the airlines who are willing to cooperate and make travel across the region easier, because the reality is that in this very same day, it is cheaper for a Barbadian to book a flight to New York than it is for that said Barbadian to book a flight to St. Lucia, which is just a hop and skip across the water. These are things that we really need to look at with a level of urgency if we are really committed and sincere about this regional integration movement. We talk, and this is getting to St. Lucia. I would not even bother to the headaches that you will encounter if you try to get from Barbados to Jamaica or the Bahamas. So these are things that we definitely need to work on as a region if we expect the regional integration process to work. Because if it is that Barbadians are able to pick up and say, spend a weekend, as you used to at one point in time, at a very low rate in St. Lucia, in Dominica, we will get to learn more about the people there, develop relationships, and develop the culture. But it was disappointing, Mr. President, that in 2018, when this government came into office, one of the first things they abandoned, which to many Barbadians was pinnacle to that regional integration movement, was to abandon their majority shareholdership in LIAT, which we know helped in that regional integration process. It may not have made a profit in many cases, but it definitely was a start in helping Caribbean people to be able to move easily across the region and to help in that regional integration process. Not everything with regard to regional integration will be profitable for the governments. But you have to recognize that the same way that we recognize that Transport Board is an essential service to get persons around Barbados, we have to recognize that regional integration in terms of flights is important in terms of helping persons to get around the region. So we cannot just talk the talk, but we also have to walk it as well. We also have to practice it as well. We also have to show true commitment and not just jump on the bandwagon when it seems to be suitable for you at the time. So if it is that we are serious about regional integration, a lot of the pillars need to be there to support it. And you cannot just abandon them at a time when it is not convenient for you, as we did with Liat, who, and even up to this day, regional travel has not returned to the level which it was at with Liat, and that contributes to the way how you can get your cricket teams around the Caribbean. It contributes to the way how you can get your produce around the Caribbean. It contributes to the way how you can get your goods and services around the Caribbean. Because there were many business people who could depend on Liat, might be late sometimes, but they definitely will come for you, that you can take a flight to Trinidad in the morning, and even though your flight coming out in the evening should be at 9 o'clock, at least by 11 o'clock it will be there and you'll be home. So that you know, so that you know that you can get around the region with some ease. But now today, we don't have that luxury, because you might go to Trinidad in the morning for a one-day meeting, but have to find out that you have to overnight, or if you really want to get back to Barbados, you might have to take a longer flight or a longer journey. It is not that easy right now to get around the region with the absence of Liat being a player. Don't care how many other players come into the market. Caribbean people had a trust and a relationship with Liat. Would be late, but it definitely came. You can sit down in the airport and know that that Liat plane will come back for you. It will not abandon you. But you cannot be sure with some other carriers that have come along and tried to replace what Liat was doing. So if you are serious about regional integration, the first step that you must make, it must be cheaper for CARICOM citizens to travel around the region. And it should not be, we should not be looking at airline costs of over $100 just to get from Barbados to St. Vincent or Barbados to St. Lucia. If it was more affordable, you would have more persons traveling throughout the region, you will have more trade throughout the region, and all of the barriers to integration, you will quickly see how easily they will melt away. So I think that we did a disservice to the regional integration movement when we abandoned and gave up our shares in Liat. If you're really serious about regional integration, you cannot just make it a convenience. You cannot just do it when it is convenient for you, Mr. President. Next item, Mr. President. When we, speaking earlier about the Caribbean Court of Justice, now we know that in other CARICOM countries, there was a lot of debate about it, and there were the two sides. CARICOM, some political parties were in favor of the CARICOM Court of Justice, and others were in favor of staying with the Privy Council. And it was used as a political tool in other jurisdictions in order to win votes. And in some jurisdictions, the mindset was built up by some persons that no, it was better to stay with the Privy Council and not go with the CARICOM Court of Justice. Mr. President, that did not happen here in Barbados. And I believe that we had a clean transition from the Privy Council to the CARICOM Court of Justice here in Barbados, which is the way it ought to be. The point that I'm making, Mr. President, is that when it comes to issues of regional integration, we need to take out the partisan politics out of it, because that would affect the way in which the citizens buy into these regional integration efforts. And so that is one of the major points that I would like to make, Mr. President, that in order for regional integration to work, we need to find a way to diffuse the tension and make it less political, but more about national development and about the people. You also, Mr. President, have to have a certain level of communication and buy-in by persons into the movement if you expect it to work. That is where the communication must come. So, Mr. President, if there is one drawback from this process which we are doing today, this process is almost a validation of something which was already done and committed to. And now we are putting the legislation in place. And because of conversations which were already had in public, we are now trying to explain the process to the people of what was already committed to without much of their involvement in the process and commitment to the process. So, Mr. President, that is a failure in what we are doing here today, because what we are doing here today should have been done months or years before the announcement was made, Mr. President, that we will have the free movement of certain Caribbean territories within Barbados from the 1st of October. Mr. President, I would want to say that we are doing it wrong. And we should have had the communication and the education program with the people of Barbados, get their buy-in and get their feel for it before we go ahead and make a commitment to doing it, and then we come back and more or less force their hand into accepting what the government has already agreed to do. This does not help the regional integration movement. It creates resistance because no one likes to feel as though they're being forced to accept something in a relationship. So even in a relationship with your family or with your children, if they feel that you are forcing something down their throat, it is already a done deal, and they have no choice to accept it, there are some people that for the sake of resistance will just resist it. And that is what the door that we have opened up with the way how we are going about this process today. You announced that it was happening in October, the 1st of October. This is now the 22nd of October, and we are debating the legislation to make it valid here in the Senate. We forgot the conversation that was supposed to happen before. We forgot the process of bringing the people on board and taking them along with us, making them feel as though they were a part of the decision-making process, making them feel that the decision to open up Barbados' borders to persons from St. Vincent, from Dominica, and Grenada, and Belize was part of their decision. But now we are, instead of bringing them on board to help in making and crafting the way how it is to be done, we are now forcing it upon them, and they have no choice but to accept it because, and that is how it seems to most people, they have no choice to accept it because the government has the overwhelming majority in the other place. It has the majority here that will pass to pass the legislation, so it is a done deal. You might as well accept it. So regardless of the fuss, regardless of the situation, regardless of whether or not you feel as though the country is ready for it, it has already been done. We are just here today paying lip service to it and have no choice but to accept what has already been done. And that is not the way in which you should be dealing with regional integration if it is something that you wish for all citizens to have a buy-in and have a say in the process. Now, Mr. President, there has been a lot of talk in the country since the announcement of this movement and the fact that Barbadians realized, well, look, come 1st of October, the decision was already made, we didn't participate in it, and we have to accept it. And you cannot say that resistance is unmerited, and you cannot say that as a result of that resistance, it means that Barbadians are not interested in regional integration. I will tell you that I am very much interested in regional integration, but I am interested in regional integration which is done and gone about the right way and which involves all of the people. And some of the challenges which persons have with this process is the timing, Mr. President. Now, it is being introduced at a time where there are a number of things going on in the world and in Barbados, both socially and economically, which would suggest, could we have put a pause on this, or could we have gone about it another way? Is it going to be beneficial to Barbadians at this stage? And those are questions which reality is that you have to answer. And those are questions which you must be able to feed the information to the people of Barbados to make them feel comfortable with the process. When I refer to the economic situation, who will this impact the most here in Barbados? I believe that businesses are looking forward to it because some businesses see it as an opportunity to expand their workforce and to possibly have cheaper labor coming into the country. So you see that it will benefit business because we would obviously want to reduce our overheads, and if there's a possibility that it expands your pool of which you can seek labor, but unfortunately, people are more geared by profit than they are of social responsibility, and if they also see a responsibility to lower their costs, and some say by as much as 40% or 60%, they will employ persons at a lower rate than what they currently employ persons at now. So who will this impact? The business will benefit, but will the young persons who are now seeking employment, will it benefit them, or will it be disadvantageous to them? And that is the situation that you face in Barbados currently. As you go around the constituency in places such as Parks Road, Bank Hall, all of those areas, and you speak to the residents in those areas, a number of the young people are disappointed with the lack of employment opportunities available to them. Even though this government is given the impression that there is a building boom in Barbados and there's a need for skills, when you visit many of those construction sites, the persons who you see being employed on those construction sites, they're not Barbadians. In fact, I've even heard one of the largest contractors in Barbados made reference to the fact that they have to employ interpreters to work with the staff that they're bringing in, the staff that they're bringing in. So it obviously means that they're not Barbadians. And that is a disservice to the young people of Barbados who feel as though they're living in a Barbados where they no longer have any opportunities, that you have persons coming in from overseas who are taking up their work. You can even go to the hospital, Mr. President. You have persons who are trained in nursing but can't get a job because this government took the decision to bring in nurses from Ghana and to fill up all of the places. And you have persons graduating from the Barbados Community College who it is important for the continuation and for their development to have the opportunity to work, Mr. President, in a tertiary level institution, but there are not enough spaces for them to work in those institutions because of the decision of this government to bring in nurses from Ghana and other places.
On a point of order, Mr.
Yes,
President.
what's point of order?
Mr. President, the honourable member is misleading the House. The way in which he framed his comment that this government took a decision to bring in nurses from Ghana, and that has prejudiced Barbadians, is a misrepresentation of what happened. There was a dearth of nursing skills in Barbados, a severe dearth, particularly impacting the operations of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to the extent that nurses were working more than one shift, that they were complaining about stress, that they were complaining about just the difficulty of covering a ward because they didn't have enough numbers. And they didn't have enough numbers for two reasons which compounded each other. The first was that not enough young people viewed nursing as an attractive career and were going into nursing in the numbers that they used to 40 years ago. And second, for whatever reason, and I don't purport to know the reason, there was an extremely high fail rate of people who took the nursing exams in Barbados. And those two facts compounded to create a dearth of nurses. In the absence of numbers of nurses to support proper health care in Barbados, and in a situation where the absence of nurses was creating severe stress for those who were struggling to carry the system, particularly in the context of the QEH, the government took the decision that nurses had to have been brought in. And I was not going to speak, sir, but I will now speak in this debate. Because, but sir, the point is that government did not take the decision to prejudice Barbadians or to prejudice Barbadian nurses. It was the absence of nurses to support proper health care in the system and the stress that was being created on those who were in the system that forced the government for such importation.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the point still stands that as a result of the decision made by the government, there are still a number of persons who graduated from the Barbados Community College with a degree in nursing who have not yet had the opportunity because of space to work within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or the polyclinic setting. And that is important towards their growth and development in the nursing profession. And many of them have to end up working within the care homes, which does not necessarily have the same impact in the profession. So that is just a decision which was made by government, but you have to look at the long-term impact on which it has had on young persons in Barbados. I go on, Mr. President, to say, look, this government has talked about a building boom. And when you drive across Barbados, if you go into Old Town, you will see new sky-rise towers being developed. If you go to Brandon's, one I think was recently completed, and there's another one being done. But in particular, I happened to pass one yesterday in Old Town. And even when you look at the manner in which it is being constructed, in terms of the scaffolding. Normally when we are constructing buildings in Barbados like that, we don't do that sort of scaffolding network. So it does show that there is a different type of, we have even imported the building practice. And if you look at that site, Mr. President, a lot of the persons working on those buildings are not Barbadian. They're not even persons from within the CARICOM region, Mr. President. And you have a number of young people who are on the blocks but cannot get into those jobs. And one of the reasons too, Mr. President, is that the pay for those said jobs. Now, Mr. President, we have a situation where, and because of the cost of living in Barbados, we have reached a stage where most persons in construction pay their laborers between $80 to $100 a day. Because of the quality of work which they do, the conditions in which they have to work under, and you have to recognize, Mr. President, the cost of living in Barbados has gone up astronomically. But you have some of those sites, Mr. President, those work sites, Mr. President, where laborers are being paid less than that $80 to $100 a day, sometimes as low as $60 a day, even though it is understood that they may have entered a quotation for more to pay the laborers, but actually end up paying persons less. Now, then on the other hand, there are some people that will say the young people in Barbados don't want work because they turn up to these same job sites and then are told that they have to work for that below standard wage. That, Mr. President, I believe is unfair not only to the Barbadians, but it is also unfair to the labor which you have imported in. And I think that if we want this regional integration process to work, one standard which we must set is that if we have a standard of pay across a sector, that standard of pay must be maintained and the conditions of service must be maintained regardless of the nationality of the persons doing the job, so that you will not have those situations where persons are able to hire cheaper imported labor because Barbadians expect to be working at a particular salary, and when they turn up to the job and realize that the salary is much less than what was expected or what they're accustomed to, well, rightfully so, they refuse the job. Because the reality is this: persons who come into a country to work, to earn money to send back out, in most situations, they pool together their resources. And you will have a situation where it may be great for them to work for $60 a day because together they can pool together their resources and cut their expenses. But a Barbadian who lives in the country cannot afford to live on that $60 a day, especially when the pay normally would guarantee $80 to $100 a day, because the cost of living in Barbados is high. You have to, if you're in a situation where you have to pay rent, you have to pay utility bills, you have to pay for transportation, you also have to child care and all of those services, it is unquestionable to force persons to actually take a cut in their salaries.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order. Reluctantly.
What's the point of order?
The honourable member is continuing to mislead the House. I was hoping that at some point it would have gotten better, but regrettably I have to rise. Mr. President, the Ministry of Labour, I believe last year, would have introduced a particular measure as it related to the construction sector. There was one company in particular that the Ministry of Labour had been investigating, and the unions had been participating in that process. They intervened, and they had a very specific set of parameters ensuring that there was a minimum wage for persons working in the construction sector. That also applied, Mr. President, in the security sector, and then subsequently in the last 5 years, Mr. President, we have seen 2 minimum wage increases. It is incorrect and misleading for the honourable member to ignore all of those publicly announced interventions, both in the construction sector and otherwise, to allow him to proceed with really what is an underwhelming and a disappointing presentation.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Senator Cummings for confirming that the practice did happen in Barbados, and there's no way for us to guarantee on every single construction site that it is still not occurring.
Mr. President, I rise again on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
Mr. President, at the time, and I believe since then, you have heard from the Ministry of Labor, and even in the course of this debate, it is not, the honourable member must not begin to mislead the House when corrected, then attempt to dig down on it, but change the focus of what he was saying originally. Mr. President, the monitoring of persons who are looking at construction sites has also been announced as part of those interventions, including in the debate in the other place on this same bill, Mr. President, where it was announced that the capacity of the Ministry of Labor to monitor sites and to monitor workplaces was going to be expanded.
Thank you, Senator Cummings.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you,
continue,
Senator
Senator
Cummings, for
please.
confirming everything that I said and intended to say with regard to the construction industry, because she said it was going to be done. She said also that it did happen, and my point that I made is that we have no way of policing it until we have the labor officers in place, which she just confirmed that they're not yet in place. Listen, sip some St. Lucie brown water and just chill.
Honourable Senators, please. Address the
you,
chair,
Mr.
both of you,
President.
please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do continue, Mr. President. The point that was well made by Senator Cummings is that we have a practice in this country where persons have been known to employ foreign workers and pay them at a lower rate than what you would traditionally pay Barbadian workers. If we want the regional integration process to work, Mr. President, the point that I was making is that we have to set standards where the same employment rate, the same salary and conditions of service are guaranteed for all workers, regardless of if they are local, or if they're from CARICOM, or if they're from the Commonwealth, or if they're from any other places outside of the region. That is necessary for this process to work, so that if Barbadians want to have a particular job in a sector, that they do not feel that they need to refuse the job because the conditions of service and the quality of pay, Mr. President, are not up to the standard to which they are accustomed. And that is something which many young Barbadians are facing, because they recognize the job opportunities in Barbados are very limited. And for those, not every Barbadian has a university degree or qualifications as a lawyer that may be able to do as the Minister of Home Affairs suggested, that if you can't get a job in Barbados, that you leave the country and go someplace else and look for work. Not every single Barbadian will be in that position. You have some Barbadians who have low skills and skills that may not put them in a position to qualify for a job outside of Barbados. And you cannot be in a situation where you are taking those jobs away from them and you are not giving them the necessary opportunity for growth and development. So that is one area in which this falls down at this time, and where you had persons feeling some level of resentment to the decision of the government to open up the Barbadian economy so quickly. Another area which you must look at, Mr. President, is the availability of resources. Now, we are in a situation, Mr. President, where, an unfortunate situation, where there is this culture of renting rooms in Barbados, where persons rent a room within a house and they share the bathrooms and the kitchen with other persons. So if it's a 3-bedroom house, you can have as much as 3 different persons renting each of those rooms, and sometimes 2 or 3 persons renting a single room, and all of them living together in the same house, sharing the same kitchen, the same bathroom, putting food in the same fridge, using the same stove, and all of those things. Now, this is something that has gone on in Barbados for a number of years, and it has gotten worse. The reason why it has gotten worse, because of the cost of living in Barbados, those rental rooms at one point in time were probably rent for like $100 a week. So that for a month, an individual would probably pay $400. Now you have some persons renting those same rooms for as much as $300 a week. So this is happening, Mr. President, obviously, because the housing stock in Barbados is not sufficient enough that every person who would like to have their own piece of the rock can have it. And here you have a government who brought nothing more than a whole catastrophe of failure, with $60 million gone down the drain, and cannot point to a housing solution in Barbados to benefit that $60 million. So you are adding to the problem because of the failures of the government. A whole project where the only thing that has come out of it is the firing of a minister and not the building of any houses to house Barbadians and to take the pressure off of the housing stock in this country. So you will now have persons coming into Barbados competing with Barbadians who want an apartment to rent or who would now wish a house. So you're now taking it further and further out of the price point or the reach of the average Barbadian. And you're also creating problems for those said persons who will be coming in. Has the government sat down and rationalized a plan that from the 1st of October, if a number of people came into Barbados, where would they be housed? And at what rate would they have to pay their rent? Right now, if you go to the welfare department, and the welfare even makes the commitment to pay your rent, that many of the persons on welfare in Barbados who find themselves in that situation where the welfare is willing to pay the rent cannot find some place to rent or a landlord who is willing to accept the payment from the welfare. One, because the amount that the welfare is willing to pay for the rent is way below the current going rate of the rent that the landlords are charging. And 2, not many people are willing to enter into that relationship. So the question is, and these are questions which must be asked, what solutions did this government put in place to make sure that persons who come into this country in these projects would have adequate housing accommodation, and you will not be creating slums and ghettos across Barbados because persons are living in less than adequate housing accommodation. This is a reality of what is happening in this country, Mr. President. And this government, going ahead with this policy, did not make any provision for the back end and for the reality that many of these persons will face and for the pressure which it would put on
a point of order.
We already have.
On a point of order.
What's the point of order, Senator? Or what's the point of order, Senator Thompson?
Mr. President, sir, having so well misdirected himself, the Honorable Senator now seeks to misdirect the Chamber. Underpinning the assumption of the Honorable Senator's speech is that all of the people who are coming, or the vast majority who are coming, are at welfare or sub-welfare level and are only coming to do blue-collar or menial jobs and will be living in substandard housing. It does not at all seem to occur to the Honorable Senator that persons who come will have a variety of skills, will be able to afford to rent, will add to the economy because they will be doing work, sending money back home, renting property, buying goods and services. This notion, and implicit is a contempt for other Caribbean people. That, oh, we open our borders so all kinds of barefoot, scruffy, nasty looking people can come out here looking for jobs and take up people low rate rooms and all this kind of nonsense. That is what is underpinning. It is not what is being said. It is the turn of the ball that coming at you.
No honourable members can speak nonsense in the House whilst I'm in the chair. Please pass on Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I don't associate anything that I said to what the honourable member just said. I used one scenario as an example, but persons will also be competing for the 3-bedroom bungalows to get on their own. The point is, Mr. President, the competition in the housing market will cause the prices of the houses to go up, the sale price to go up. The competition in the market will cause the rental prices to go up, and this government has not done anything, Mr. President, to help construct any houses in Barbados that will take away all they have done, Mr. President. She should have risen on a point of order with regard to
The honourable member.
She should have risen on a...
Sorry, the honourable member?
The honourable member, yes, Mr. President, should have risen on a point of order with regard to the $60 million which was wasted in Hope Housing, and up to this day, none of those houses have added or contributed to the housing stock in Barbados. So again, Mr. President, I will also suggest that the honourable member to sip some St. Lucie brown water and chill. Mr. President, thanks to the Honourable Deputy President, I believe the point with regard to the lack of adequate housing has been appropriately made, and I can now move on, Mr. President. We also have, Mr. President, when these persons come here to Barbados, the reality with regard to employment opportunities is real. Up to a few last week, I had the privilege of watching a video done by 2 young men in Barbados, which did an analysis on their own on what this government is doing and the prospects of young Barbadians being able to find jobs throughout the region. In the same countries in which we are this cooperation with, St. Vincent, Dominica, and Belize. They looked at the minimum wage within those countries, and at their assessment, no right-thinking Barbadian will leave Barbados to go and work in those countries for a minimum wage, which is way below the minimum wage at which we're getting here in Barbados. They also looked at the unemployment rate in those countries and the access to job opportunities in those countries. In one country, the unemployment rate is about 13%, so clearly they're not even, and another, the unemployment rate is about 18%, and then one, 2.1%, so you may be able to find some opportunities there. But in 2 of those countries, if they're having difficulty employing their own people, it means that there will hardly be any opportunities for our young people to find employment in those countries. This was not done, Mr. President. This is information I viewed from young Barbadians, which shows that they're thinking through the process and they're realizing, look, this may not necessarily be opening up many opportunities for me. I think the disappointment with many Barbadians is that this government, instead of opening up the doors and possibilities and opportunities for young people, they seem to be making way for any other person to come in and to be happy and satisfied in Barbados, when many young people are not necessarily feeling that level of hope and comfort in their own country. And that is something that we must pay close attention to. Mr. President, the world is changing economically and socially. All over the world, I believe that Senator Cummings would have mentioned Brexit from one perspective, but you also have to look at it from the perspective that that was an integration movement which we all thought was working, but for some reason, persons in the UK did not feel comfortable with it and decided to pull out. And even even if they were fooled, but throughout the world there is this hostility towards migrant workers. Because people believe that migrant workers are coming and taking opportunities from persons within their territories. And these are things which we must guard against, Mr. President. We cannot expect integration to be embraced when we set up in a situation where it would fail and you will have resentment by the persons who are at the lower end of the scale. Sometimes even those at the higher end of the scale might also find some reason to resent the process as well. So you cannot expect integration to work and you don't put the parameters in place to safeguard it so that everyone who participates in the process will actually benefit and find a reason to be involved in this process. So it is not to say that you're crying down gloom and gloom on the situation. We are asking that you think the process through. Migration and immigration should be managed. It should be thought out and it should be well planned so that you do not step on the corns of some people in your way to rush towards what you believe would be economic gain or economic prosperity. Before you get that economic gain and prosperity, oftentimes, Mr. President, you go through a series of pain. We also have to look, Mr. President, when persons come here to Barbados, they will be entitled to the quality health care that which we can offer. No, we are facing challenges with our healthcare system in Barbados. We are facing challenges with our school system in Barbados. Because when I say that we are facing challenges, up to this day, we have not yet improved the number of spaces available at the Samuel Jackman Preston Institute so that more Barbadians can get into those areas to study without competition. So now you're bringing additional persons who will add to the burden. Up to this day, Mr. President, the wait time at accident and emergency is not 4 hours or 8 hours, but it's like 4 days, Mr. President. When you bring in those persons, they face the same blood, because the challenge within the hospital setting is that we don't have enough beds. So if you're bringing in additional persons to add to the burden, you're not going to have adequate beds. And even though the government has again put out their fanciful promises of a project to start in December, just like the garbage trucks and the buses that will come in December, with the plan of the expansion of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for a loan of $390 million, with all the good intention of the government, it does not deal with the day-to-day, present-day reality, because that project will only come online in another 4 to 5 years. But how are you fixing the bottlenecks within the health sector, which these same persons will be coming to Barbados, Mr. President, and have to encounter? How are you fixing? Are you going to, when you stamp the immigration passport, Mr. President, at immigration, would you say to these people, do not take a house in St. Lucie because you will have to drink brown water, and we not certain about it, Mr. President? Is that the plan of the government when they stamp the passports at immigration? Avoid looking for a house in St. Lucie because we don't know when you'll be able to get clean, clear water that you can drink, that you can cook with, that you can wash your white clothing with, that you can bathe with, because this government has not put a plan in place to deal with that matter, Mr. President. And all of these shortcomings within society, Mr. President, when these people come here, they will just continue to add to the numbers. So, Mr. President, it is not that we are against regional integration. We are for regional integration. But we want to do it in such a way, Mr. President, that everybody benefits. And that you don't have a category of people feeling as though they're being victimized, that they're being abused, and they're being taken advantage for, and that no opportunities are there for them. We want everybody to flourish and get by at the same rate? Did the government put in place the necessary plans? We are recognizing some challenges within our economic framework. Just last week, the U.S. Treasury Secretary warned the IMF and the World Bank to get back to the areas where they're technically competent and to refrain from the loans which this government has benefited from in terms of the climate resilience loan. So we can possibly see that that source of investment and loans for Barbados may soon be withdrawn as an avenue for this country. So, and when we face these economic hardships, can we maintain the economic environment for everyone that we are inviting to come here? With all of the economic red flags on the horizon, the World Bank has put a projection for a lowering of the economic growth in the country. We are building lots of hotels, and we are expanding lots of villas and condominiums, but yet still the tourists are complaining about the expense of being here. So we are not necessarily seeing the numbers, and there's no guarantee it will be there. We want, when you open up the doors to regional integration, that everybody benefits. And it is not a situation where some people feel as though they're being exploited and they're being cheated. And Mr. President, what we will say about this legislation is that we are concerned with the timing, and we are concerned with the government's effort at communicating and involving and bringing along the people of Barbados. We need to take steps to make sure that we do not tarnish our regional integration efforts by moving too hastily along with projects just to put a feather in someone's cap, Mr. President. With those few words, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I chose to lead the baton on behalf of the independents today, coming from not necessarily a unique position, but essentially being a child of a CARICOM union. And therefore, I believe, like others in this chamber, it allows me to offer a perspective of having, for all intents and purposes, lived the CARICOM dream. Now, where I'm from is a place where, in the household itself, federation was debated. In the household itself, I would hear my mother speak about her perspective of being on campus and discussing the result of the Jamaican election, in which the referendum related to continuing with the federation, and hearing the sentiments of whether it was disappointment or influence as to why it didn't succeed. Who knows the real reason, but the point is that federation did not work. Famously, Eric Williams, who was cited by the Speaker on behalf of government, gave the famous speech in which he said, and we all know it, 1 from 10 leaves 0. Context being that Trinidad and Jamaica were the economic powerhouses at the time, and Jamaica, as a result of their referendum, which of course begs the question of voice of the people being the voice of God, Jamaica, as a result of their referendum, said no to the federation. Continuing, Trinidad says we're not bearing that burden, and we all went our separate ways, save for the OECS. In doing my approach to the speech, though, I thought it interesting to look back a bit, similar to what Senator Cummings did, but more to anchor it on a statement made by Prime Minister Eric Williams in 1948, in which he lamented the risk that a fragmented West Indies would invite exploitation. Now, the question is whether those were prophetic words. we find ourselves in 2025 with individual CARICOM states being put in positions where they're being asked to do certain things. And these requests, depending on your political or philosophical bent, can be quite burdensome. And perhaps if you had the ability to say, well, let me take it to CARICOM, you might have some level of protection. For my part, I was warmly embraced when I left Barbados to go to Trinidad, and I was warmly re-embraced when I left Trinidad to come back to Barbados. I think a fact that we can all relate to is that we as CARICOM people, we already move. We move between islands through relationships, through culture. We move through love. We move for opportunity. Sometimes we move just to get away. But we have always moved within this region. I'm sure between Senator Morris and our Senator Reverend, we will hear the historic arguments that we all come from the same place as such, just different stops along the way, so we're necessarily reconnecting. The question is, though, while we recognize that there's always been this movement of CARICOM nationals, we do recognize that there has always been this difficulty from the political level with regard to the implementation of the necessary structures to facilitate the movement. So there are certain benefits that are always touted. In other words, what is the point of all this? Why are we doing this? What is the benefit for the individual Barbadian citizen? The economists and the social engineers argue that the benefits of this movement are that you will have an increase in labor. We have heard in Barbados that there's a shortage of labor available for the various projects that exist. We have seen labeled titans of industry indicate the need that they have to go overseas to fulfill their labor quota. Is this what is being proposed to help with that? Supposedly, these type of things lead to an increase in cross-border investment. Cross-border investment therefore leads to economic growth. Is this something that would increase cross-border investment? They say that integration leads to an increase in access to markets. We've had access to markets in CARICOM, but you also see that certain CARICOM territories benefit more from the open borders than others. The big boys with the big engines, Jamaica and Trinidad. Jamaica actually complains about the amount of stuff that Trinidad puts on its markets. There's supposedly a reduction in the cost for going to market for different elements of reinsurance and protection as to CARICOM nations. We saw some benefits, I think, during the public health crisis of COVID, but I think we all do recall that there was a period where, despite CARICOM, there was every man for himself. So we must be pragmatic. And finally, the concept of this regional integration is that it allows us international leverage. And I dare say international leverage, as I indicated earlier, would be something that will benefit member states in 2025. We have seen the benefits, sir, in terms of the much lauded University of the West Indies. I'm sure many of us in here are products of that institution. We have seen the benefits of the CCJ in terms of decisions which guide the interaction of the states between each other, individual rights, even when governments, when it suits their purposes, may seek to foo-foo, is that the correct term? The institution. And we have seen the benefits in terms of international or regional trade and negotiations. Now, while there are benefits, there's always going to be risk. There's always going to be downsides to this integration movement. Certain islands, as I indicated before, have competitive advantages. Trinidad, Jamaica, and Guyana is now becoming the economic powerhouse in the region. What is going to be the impact on local businesses as a result of this? Can they compete with their more robust colleagues from other territories? When local businesses are forced to bring their tariffs in line with the regional bloc, what happens to the cost of living for persons who live in those islands? Trinidadians are now complaining about the price of gas going up, and if we had to pay the price of gas in Barbados that Trinidadians had to pay, we would be walking up. If we do a regional approach to tariff on these things, it will cause an increase in cost. Higher tariffs means the cost of goods go up. That means the cost of living goes up. So when we talk about regionalism, when we talk about integration, we need to recognize that there are risks. And then, as said somewhat, perhaps a bit more heatedly by the member who represents the opposition as such, sir, there is a strain on national resources as a result of regional integration. This is a fact. This is a stated fact. The resources which will be impacted are healthcare, more persons, regional movement. We have seen in instances where leaders of other territories have had to come to Barbados because of the quality of the healthcare. That's a fact. That's not someone seeking to be alarmist. It is a fact. There is going to be an impact on the educational resources. We have seen in the news, we see it every school term, we have seen it this term, the issue with regard to the current educational system, with regard to the schools. These are facts. These things, healthcare, education, are impacted by regional movement. The question of housing, rents increase, supply and demand. That's a fact. It was stated recently that there has been a huge uptake in the rental costs. Some attribute it to the welcome stamp, some attribute it to a variety of things, but the point is the cost of living goes up, the cost of housing goes up, you have more people competing for a limited resource. So there will be positives and there will be negatives. So Barbados, once again leading as it did with the original Treaty of CARICOM, is saying, let's go. Barbados now is joined by Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent. So the question is, what price? What price will be paid for taking these steps? And I have no problem with the concept of Barbados punching above its weight. I have no problem with Barbados leading. I have no problem with the statements as if this is who we are. But sometimes I always tell my people who I work with that perhaps it's not about being first, but it's about doing it correctly. And it's how do we balance this? How do we do these things in a manner which we are cognizant of the cause and effect? So the fact that it's said in a political setting that there are risks and there are dangers, that is somewhat an alarmist tone. It's a reality. It is a reality, and it's a determined and stated cause and effect of integration. One of the other issues that I am concerned about, sir, is the question of crime. And let me at the outset say, I am not saying that regional integration would lead to an increase in crime. So that's not what I'm saying. Let me repeat it. I am not saying that regional integration leads to an increase in crime. I am saying that it was stated that local gangs are affiliated with regional criminal groups. The 6s, it was stated to be, and the 7s. Somehow these numbers are very popular. If the criminal elements already have the integration, already have the linkages, already have the movement, what about the resources to put these things down? Right now, we have regional security training, We have the RSS, we have Impacts, we have Interpol, and a variety of agencies. But what we do not have is the local implementation of the arrest warrant treaty, which allows policemen to go from jurisdiction A to jurisdiction B to recover criminals. We still have to rely on extradition. The recent case of Brent Thomas, where Trinidadian police came to Barbados, Barbadian police were involved in the removal of the gentleman, resulted in a litany of statements with regard to the correct procedure as to be utilized. But the point is, if the criminals are moving and the movement is being facilitated by these borders being opened, we need to ensure that the police can go after them with the same alacrity, that they be given the resources similar to what the FBI has, where they move, because we saw how that originated. The FBI had to get specific powers to move from state A to state B when they were pursuing criminals, because criminals were going across borders and doing as they like. We have a situation now where criminals move with impunity throughout our region. Sometimes they're intercepted, sometimes they're cautioned, sometimes they're stopped, sometimes quote-unquote concerts don't happen. But there's still the movement. And while the police can share the information, the ability to come after these persons, to stop them in their tracks as if they're where the regional support needs to be strengthened, and the police being given our agency be established that allows us to go after those who will bring harm under the guise of regional integration. So I therefore believe, sir, that we need to recognize that the concerns expressed are valid. They may not be politically expedient, because I don't think any political party gets by saying, that's a good point. That's a good point. That's not how politics works. As someone says, no opposition ever succeeded by saying the government is doing a good job here. That's not how it works, I understand. But we are seeing, as indicated by the previous speaker, as I said, somewhat differently, there is a reaction to this immigration issue. There's a rise in nationalism throughout the world, and the scapegoats are always the migrants. The recent statement by the Prime Minister of Japan speaks for itself. A whole ministry has been established to deal with the quote-unquote migrants. Everybody just put your country and put the word first after it. That is where the world is. That is the reality of where we stand in 2025. So you're going to get a reaction whenever you speak about integration and movement and people and migrants, a response of protectionism and a populist narrative. You're taking away jobs from people. You are going to cause suffering. We have limited resources. Why are you doing this now? The refrain was, and I really should check the source, I'm sure we've heard it, so let's put this under the table of anecdotal, or I heard. Because you know, in Barbados, nobody knows, but everybody hears. So I heard, sir, that when they had the debate about the federation, that in Jamaica, the statement that was made was that if you had two goats, the Trinidadians coming for one to curry. Now, think of the impact and think of whether we have evolved as a Caribbean people for such a statement to fall flat in 2025. It won't. If people are concerned about their individual welfare, the concept of sharing limited resources leads to a reaction. So that's a reality. So the government finds its position of having to deal with that. It has the obligation, and I keep on saying, you can't get vexed if people say, why are you doing it? What is in it? And repeat the messaging. The government is excellent at messaging when it's ready. Excellent at messaging. So the heat or the concerns, continue to address them, continue to educate people, continue to let persons know why we are doing this and why whatever perceived harmful benefits they are will be mitigated. That's the fact, that's the obligation. For my part, I have no choice but to support. I cannot, as a child of CARICOM, come in here and say no to this. But at the same time, while supporting it, I can recognize the concerns of persons who are saying, will it hurt me? Will it impact me? And there is a price to be paid for leadership. I think we all pay it in one way or another. I think the government needs to be cognizant and to see as far as practicable, how can we protect individuals from these stated concerns, real or imagined. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin.
Mr. President, colleagues,
Senator Morris.
sorry. Mr. President, colleagues, I rise to give my support to this bill that is before us because I believe that freedom of movement is integral to Caribbean territories, especially CARICOM. It is necessary for regional integration. It is necessary for Caribbean economic development. It is necessary for social cohesion. Sir, it is necessary for any region where there are states coming together to form a union. And so this issue of freedom of new movement is not new. It is not a new issue, sir. What is new is that we are introducing it here, but it's not new. I want to posit this afternoon, this afternoon. The issue in the Caribbean has never been Caribbean integration. Every leader throughout the years, every leader has supported Caribbean integration. The issue, sir, is freedom of movement. That caused the demise. In fact, that was one of the reasons that caused the demise of the West Indies Federation, along with some insularity. But sir, I intend to take an historical approach to this, even if as long as I have time too, I will go into a theological discourse. But let us go back, sir. Let's go back. I'm going to go back as far as 1876. Remember that Jamaica and Barbados, and I think St. Vincent, Vox Populi, around the same time, all flared up into rebellion because the British government wanted to solve the social, economic, and political problems in these countries. And the British government wanted one of the moves was to introduce freedom of movement. We know what happened in Jamaica, sir, with Governor Ayre, he led Jamaica into a situation where there would be killing. The Jamaica Assembly panicked and succumbed to Crown Colony government. In Barbados, sir, we had the same issue when there was proposed the Confederation of Barbados with the Windward Islands. Again, sir, the issue was freedom of movement. As a matter of fact, when John Pope Hennessy came, John Pope Hennessy said that one of his 6-point plans was movement between the prisoners and movement in the Caribbean with prisoners. The Moyne Commission recommended movement, freedom of movement between Caribbean territories. As a matter of fact, sir, when they look at the population of Barbados then, the Moyne Commission even recommended that Barbados be allowed to go to St. Vincent, and they had an estate at Vieux Fort so that the Barbados could go there. I'm going to stop there to say this, sir. That I heard the leader of the leader of government business, sir, say that somebody said that if we do not either federate or parish. That was said by Edward Carrington in 2006, but long before that, Norman Manley had said it, federate or parish. In fact, he said that if we fail to federate, we are purblind, and we will be condemned at the bars of history. That's what he said. And this continued, sir, because we're going to spend some time on Barbados. This continued, sir, with the 1958 to 62 Federation, which, as we all know, failed. And if you look at the reasons for its failure, sir, I think Sir John Mordecai, he was the one who was advertising and pushing for freedom of movement. The issue was never federation. Every Caribbean leader wanted federation. The issue is freedom of movement, and that's what we're discussing here today. Barbados' independence, sir, I've always made the point. Even in my view, I'm not saying, but my view is that it was hastily conceived. But let us go and see what happened at Barbados' independence. We have all said that the Right Excellent Arabar, sir, was a regionalist. But what does the evidence say? That when he moved for independence, sir, when he wanted independence for Barbados, he wanted to go alone. And the books will tell you that he wanted to go alone for the same reason that Eric Williams and Manley, the same reasons that Manley and Eric Williams did not want the Federation because, sir, of freedom of movement. And how do we know this, sir? Yes, he came, Right Excellent Arabar at the time came with independence, but he wanted to go it alone. And he was objected to Winter Crawford and Erskine Ward. Erskine Ward was the Minister of the Portfolio. Winter Crawford was the Deputy Prime Minister. Winter Crawford was responsible for industrialization in this country. And he knew that if we were to have successful industrialization, then we needed people. So he supported independence within a federation of the Little Eight. It was the same thing, sir. When you check the history, the only leader that did not object to freedom of movement was Grantley Adams, sir. All the others wanted independence, but no freedom of movement. They cannot have the two. Sir, what happened, sir, is that Arabar decided that he was going to go independence alone. He rejected the moves by Winter Crawford and Erskine Ward, and both of them resigned from the cabinet. So when we get in here and talk, or go outside and talk, bear these things in mind, that both Winter Crawford and Erskine Ward resigned from the cabinet, sir. I think that these fellows decided to be going to side with Grantley Adams, but they knew Grantley Adams had a point. And as a result of that, sir, some sordid debates followed after. Because Grantley Adams, and this is something that people ought to know, because I hear politicians people talk about politicians. But when you remain, sir, and your evening years, people begin to pillory you. The debate, sir, and you can check. Let me give you the information. Better check first, sir. I think it is Hansard, the official Gazette. Give me a minute, sir. 1966, 67, the period from 1966 to 71. Granny Adams was pilloried in the House of Assembly. Can you imagine the Prime Minister saying to him then that he, because of what he was saying, said to him, "Know your place, old man, know your place." Because Granny Adams wanted independence within the Federation of the Little Eight. Joy Edwards got up and he said, I can tear holes in his backside. So that's the thing, not me. I can tear holes in his backside. Only because of that. They never forgave Granny Adams. And furthermore, sir, if I may go a little further, what do we have? I'm not reading, I'm reading, no, it's a pen, but I'm saying to you, I did the check, sir. I did the check, sir. I checked Hansard, and I realized that that is what was said, because there were quotations, sir. And Granny Adams told him that the only mistake he had ever made was when he introduced the Honorable Prime Minister into politics and referred to him as a dictator, a tyrant, and some other words, sir. Those are in Hansard. But let me go a little bit further, sir. This has not changed. I believe that the opposition, sir, right now, and I have to say, the opposition is consistent. They're consistent. They're talking about integration. The issue is not integration. The issue is freedom of movement. The Shanique Mary case has already been cited. And the opposition seems to forget the ever so welcome wait for call, where a number of Ghanaians also were rounded up and exported or deported from this country. And that treatment was no different from the way ICE in the United States is treating some of those migrants. It's no different, sir, when you look at it. So it's okay for the opposition to come in here and pump us up about what should we do. It's not integration, sir. It is freedom of movement. They talk about the CCJ, that Barbados gone ahead and accepted the CCJ. What should we do, sir? Wait for somebody to do it. That's what we should do. Wait for somebody else to do it. So if we have to wait on persons, then we have to wait on some person in a sober moment, but say, until they reach the point where they will say that the Caribbean is a zone of peace and not an illusion. CCJ, sir, the thing that irks me with this is that all of us do law, no, not us, do law at the University of the West Indies. You go to school, you go to law school, Trinidad or Jamaica. If you do law in England, you still have to spend some time here in the Caribbean attending law school. In other words, we are talking about a Caribbean entity. But we do all our law here. You go up there, have to come and go to law school, but yet we cannot trust our jurists with an appeal as the final court of appeal.
the problem is one of freedom of movement. So I grew up in Blackbess and Mangrove, St. Peter. I say that all the time because these are the people that make me feel and know that I belong, that I'm not fitting in. And I remember, sir, there where the quarry is, below there used to be a camp. And the Vincentians used to come to cut cane, right. The Vincentians used to come and cut the canes here. But they integrated into the society. The problem with Europe, sir, is that Europe have people who come into country with different cultures, different values, different norms. We have almost the same historical background. We have almost the same values. And that is why I said to you, sir, that we cannot wait for Jamaica and for Trinidad to approve freedom of movement. So this is the problem over the years. You know that this problem was also in the United States. If you read the papers, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, that the southern states felt that they would have lost everything, that the North would come and take over. And they solved that problem. The issue is that at the abolition of slavery, when slavery was abolished, or announced, the abolition of slavery was announced, a lot of these former slaves then ran to the North only to meet racism. But it seems as though that the only freedom of movement the opposition wants to tolerate is if the persons are going to run for them in their election, or if they're going to walk up and down this country marching and protesting. Sir, somebody mentioned the time for action. I come here, sir, with all my evidence, sir. In this book here, Time for Action, the logic of freedom of movement for all categories of Western professionals, skilled personnel, and workers generally, and entrepreneurs, including higglers and hucksters, will have to be permitted to work itself through the system.
Just to maintain proper form.
This is the Time for Action, sir, which is...
No, just to say though.
The report, sir, of the Western Day Commission.
But you haven't heard what I'm going to say.
But I'm prepared to make a document.
No, that's fine. But you said somebody mentioned a time for action. I believe it was an honorable member that mentioned a time for action, not somebody. So just keep the titles official.
My apologies. Sir, how do I know? That's the Morning Commission report, sir. I came here really prepared. I'm looking for the other one. Sir.
I think you brought your whole library, Senator Morris. That's very good. We'll get to be elected.
Sir, I know how it's a thought sometimes without evidence. Sir, I said that the issue is one of movement. Let us look, sir, at Article 46, the revised Treaty of Chaguaranas, which I know is already a document of this House. Every point, sir, is one about movement. Movement for university graduates, media workers, sports persons, artists, and musicians. Member states shall establish appropriate legislative and administrative procedure to arrange and to facilitate the movement of skills. Provide for a movement of community nationals. The elimination of the requirements for passports for community nationals. Every point, sir, deals with movement. And that is why I say that the issue is one of freedom of movement. All the leaders, sir, wanted integration, but they didn't want freedom of movement. And the last person I want to refer to, sir, which I believe is also a document, in fact, it is a document of this House, is our former Prime Minister, Owen Arthur. And to quote his words, sir, this can be accomplished, secondly, the CSME must be made to be a positive and indispensable factor in the daily lives of the ordinary man and woman to confer upon it credibility and immediate relevance. This can be accomplished by extending and quickly implementing the provisions for the free movement of skills beyond the existing list of graduates, self-employed, and the technical and managerial class to the other wage-earning and artisan groups in the Caribbean. But this last paragraph is most interesting, sir. Again, each carpenter should not be made to feel that he can build the cupboards at the residence of the Prime Minister of Barbados without it being regarded as an odious and criminal act. I'm sure persons can remember that. And all I'm saying, sir, this is what this legislation is about. Freedom of movement. Freedom of movement. And why is it necessary, sir? Because our population is experiencing negative growth. Some people say it declined, it is in decline. But that's the term the sociologists use. Just experiencing negative growth. Sir, some years ago, Robert Thomas Malthus posited a theory which is now referred to as the Malthusian theory, because the population was going the other direction. It was increasing. As a matter of fact, he said it was increasing exponentially, while at the same time, food supply increased arithmetically. Right or wrong, sir? I'm not good at math, but I'm not good at that. And he believed that if it continued this, that the population growth would outpace food production, and he came up with a number of solutions, a number of positive checks and preventative checks. I won't go through all of that. But of course, Malthus's prediction was not realized because there was the improvement in agricultural techniques and all of that. But our population is going in the other direction. There's no Malthus to talk about it, but there's some common sense things that we know that can affect our population when it is on the decline. One, it is going to be an aging population. So if you have fewer young people, it means that we are going to have more elderly citizens, increased demand for health care, pensions, elder care services, a shrinking workforce. We're going to have labor shortages, sir. Economic activity will slow down. You may have to rely more on immigration. But there is one point on this that I want to take note of, sir. And that is, I'm hearing that they're bringing people to take Barbadians' job. So you really feel that people are going to flock here en masse? I don't think so, sir. But what is more, going hand in hand with a declining population is also an unemployment rate of 6%. 6%, sir, is almost full employment. So it means one way or the other, we will need some persons. And that is what the opposition failed to realize. All these things and the people and the jobs that they talk about, Barbados is 6% unemployment rate. And therefore, you know that freedom of movement can solve that problem. So that I would not go through all of them, but there's something that I want to say. I will leave the others to talk about those issues. There's something I want to say. The Prime Minister, sir, said that she believes in this covenant of hope. Covenant of hope. And I believe in it too, sir. Because I believe that our societies should be governed by covenant and not just by contract. And I pay homage, because this is where I get this information from, a Jewish rabbi called Jonathan Sachs. He wrote a number of books. I have all. But there were three in particular that we need to look at. One, how to heal a fractured world. Two, dignity and diversity. I think that's what it is. And three, the politics of hope. And he is saying, if we're going to have things like a society, it cannot be no us and them. It cannot be an I and he and he. It has to be we. Freedom of movement, sir, requires trust. Trust that our neighbors will welcome us, that our economies will benefit, and that our societies will grow stronger together. Not the doom and gloom that I've heard, sir. A covenant fosters this trust, and that is what we need in our Caribbean society, trust. If freedom of movement is to work, sir, we must have trust. Because when we embrace covenant politics, we move beyond suspicion. We move beyond competition. We begin to see migration not as a threat, but as an opportunity for cultural exchange, for economic dynamism, and for regional solidarity. Covenant politics, sir, gives us a shared responsibility. We assume responsibility for the whole, sir, not just me and my clique, but we assume responsibility for the whole, for everybody. And therefore, freedom of movement must be accompanied by shared commitments, commitments to education, commitments to healthcare, infrastructure, and employment. We must ensure that no state is left behind. It gives us regional identity because we have shared values. So a Vincentian teacher must feel safe to work in Barbados. An Antiguan priest, sir, must feel safe to work in Barbados. A Ghanese girl must feel safe to come to school in Barbados and grow up in Barbados. That is part of the identity. Sir, I would like to speak for 5 hours today.
Not today.
But I know you're going to tell me.
You have to wind up.
I have to wind up.
Yes.
Sir, sir, as I've said from the very beginning, the issue here is not integration. The issue is freedom of movement. That is what I was called here to debate today. We cannot have successful integration unless we have freedom of movement. And sir, if we have this freedom of movement, I used to mark CHC, and I used to go to Jamaica, sir. I used to go to Jamaica, and you could not tell who was Jamaican, Barbadian, anybody, only in terms of accent. Yes, sir. One final point that was made by the Honorable Senator for the opposition. Talking about CFC. We say up to now, I have a very strong relationship with CFC. And I know that every 10 years, the various syllabi are readjusted to suit circumstances in the Caribbean. Right now, I'm even involved in the amendment of the syllabus for Cape history. So I'm saying that do not let us frighten Caribbean people with these things. What we need to do, sir, is to look at this Caribbean as an entity. Look at it as an entity, all for one or one for all. I'm sure, I'm anticipating the speech by Senator Rogers because I know he can give me a calypso on that. But I do not want us to miss the point, sir. The issue is not Caribbean integration. Everybody is for it. The issue is freedom of movement. With that, sir, I wish to thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I know that there are those who appear to be eager to speak, but I beg to move at this time the suspension of this sitting for lunch to reconvene at 3:10 in the afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3:10 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, this sitting is suspended until 3:10 p.m.